February 19, 1945, 09:02 hours. The volcanic black sand beaches of Iwo Jima. The first wave of U.S. Marines storms ashore, unopposed. No artillery, no machine gun fire. Only the rhythmic crash of Pacific surf and the grinding metallic hiss of tracked LVTs churning through ash-dark sand. 16,000 men surge inland across 7 designated beaches: green 1, red 1, yellow 2, blue 1. Bluetooth their boots, sinking into coarse pumice that offers no purchase, no cover. The silence feels wrong. Veterans of Tarawa and Saipan exchange uneasy glances. Behind them, the largest armada in Pacific War history, 880 ships, stretching to the horizon, waits with guns trained on an island that refuses to answer U.S. Navy action report. 5th Fleet, February 1945. Then, at exactly 1005 hours, the island erupts, not with the wild, suicidal bonsai charges American commanders anticipated, not with the panicked, disorganized resistance that characterized previous Pacific campaigns. Instead, Mount Suribachi and the northern ridgelines unleash a mathematically precise inferno. Artillery shells bracket landing zones with surveyed accuracy. Mortar rounds fall in calculated intervals, each burst timed to maximize casualties within pre-measured kill zones. Machine guns open fire from concealed positions, offering interlocking fields, not the overlapping chaos of desperate defense, but the textbook crossfire patterns taught at Fort Benning's infantry school. Marines dive for cover that doesn't exist. The black sand absorbs their bodies like quicksand. Within 90 minutes, 2,400 Americans lie wounded or dead on beaches they thought were secured. The Amphibious Corps After-Action Report, March 1945. The American officers crouched in shell craters cannot comprehend what is happening. This isn't how Japanese defenders fight. Where are the visible bunkers? Where are the forward trenches? Why is every artillery barrage arriving with the precision of a West Point gunnery exercise? Major General Harry Schmidt, commanding the I-5th Amphibious Corps from his flagship offshore, stares at casualty reports climbing faster than any previous landing. His intelligence staff predicted 3 days to secure the island. They based those estimates on Japanese tactical doctrine, observed across 2 years of island warfare, static defense, coastal fortifications, early commitment of reserves, suicidal counterattacks. Intelligence Monograph, G2 Section, 1945. But Iwo Jima's defender did not study Japanese tactical doctrine. He studied American tactical doctrine. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, 53 years old, poetry-writing aristocrat, father of 3, designed every tunnel, every bunker, every firing position on this sulfurous rock, using principles absorbed during 2 years stationed in the United States, 2 decades earlier. Between 1928 and 1930, Captain Kuribayashi served as deputy military attaché in Washington, D.C., and traveled extensively across America, observing U.S. Army training at Fort Bliss, Texas, and studying industrial capacity in Detroit's automotive plants. Unlike most Imperial Japanese Army officers who viewed Americans as soft, undisciplined, and materialistic, Kuribayashi returned to Tokyo with a single, terrifying conclusion: Japan could not defeat the United States in a prolonged war. He saw the assembly lines. He counted the factories. He watched American soldiers train with a professionalism that matched samurai discipline but was amplified by industrial logistics his own nation could never replicate. Kuribayashi Family Letters, published 1995. That knowledge haunted him for 15 years. Now, in June 1944, when Imperial General Headquarters assigned Kuribayashi to command Iwo Jima's Defense 109th Division, 21,000 men, no hope of reinforcement or evacuation, he faced an impossible equation. He possessed inferior numbers, inferior firepower, inferior air support, and inferior naval support against the most powerful military force ever assembled. Traditional Japanese doctrine demanded he defend the beaches, counterattack immediately, die gloriously, and lose the island in 72 hours. Bushido Code insisted on it. Senior commanders expected it. Tokyo demanded it. Kuribayashi rejected it entirely. Instead, he opened his footlocker and pulled out training manuals from Fort Benning. He reviewed notes from American lectures on defense. He studied U.S. Army field manuals on interlocking fire, reverse slope defense, artillery, and protracted resistance. U.S. Army Field Manual, FM 5215, Field Fortifications, 1940. Then he did something no Japanese commander had attempted in the Pacific War. He designed a defense calculated not for honor, but for maximum American casualties per day. He ordered his men to abandon the beaches entirely, anathema to Japanese naval-oriented doctrine. He forbade bonsai charges, court-martialing officers who protested. He banned the word gyokusai, honorable death. Instead, he introduced a new phrase, kubikari sokusen, War of Attrition, 109th Division Combat Orders. July 1944. His soldiers did not understand. Many wept. Some requested transfer. Kuribayashi was asking them to betray everything they believed about warfare, honor, and death. He was asking them to fight like Americans. For 8 months, Kuribayashi's engineers, many conscripted from Japanese coal mining operations, carved 11 miles of interconnected tunnels through volcanic rock. They constructed 1,500 defensive positions, concrete pillboxes with walls 5 feet thick, spider traps with iron lids flush to ground level, artillery bunkers sunk 30 feet underground with ventilation shafts angled to disperse blast pressure. Every position offered multiple escape routes. Every gun emplacement was sited with surveyed fire lanes, duplicating U.S. Army gunnery tables. Kuribayashi personally walked every meter of terrain, plotting kill zones with American range cards. He positioned his Type 96 150mm howitzers, not for coastal defense, but for enfilade fire across interior valleys, exactly as American artillery doctrine prescribed for defensive warfare. Technical Intelligence Report, 10th Army, June 1945. He stored 8 months of food, water, and ammunition in subterranean vaults connected by narrow tunnels that forced attackers into single-file death traps. He distributed his 361 artillery pieces and 65 mortars in concealed positions with overlapping fields calculated using American forward observer techniques learned at Fort Sill. He trained his machine not to fire until enemy infantry entered prime zones, typically 200 to 75 yards. The exact engagement ranges taught in U.S. Army Small Unit Tactics Manuals, Japanese monograph, No. 48. Volcano Islands Operations, 1946. Most revolutionary. Kuribayashi banned radio communication above company level. He knew American signals intelligence would intercept transmissions. Instead, he relied on runners moving through tunnels, a communication system invulnerable to the technological eavesdropping advantage that had devastated Japanese forces across the Pacific. He had seen American SIGINT capabilities during his Washington posting. He knew the enemy's strength, so he nullified it by reverting to a communication method older than the telegraph, protected by volcanic rock and American-designed redundancy. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946, closing parenthesis. Now, as Marines claw inland through prefabricated kill zones, as Navy corpsmen drag screaming wounded back toward the surf, as American artillery pounds empty bunkers, while hidden guns fire from reverse slopes, as everything unfolds exactly as Kuribayashi calculated it, would the terrible truth begins to dawn on American commanders. They are not fighting a Japanese defense, they are fighting an American defense, designed by a man who learned it from them, perfected with suicidal discipline they could never sustain, and wielded against them with the precision of their own doctrine turned into a death trap. And somewhere, deep beneath Mount Suribachi, in a concrete bunker lit by kerosene lamps, Kuribayashi writes another letter to his wife, a letter that will never reach her, knowing that every hour his men hold this volcanic nightmare is another hour America bleeds for 8 square miles of sulfur and ash. The question haunting every Marine crawling through black sand is simple, terrible, and unanswerable. How do you defeat an enemy who learned to kill you by studying your own training manuals? The revelation arrived in fragments, decoded through blood and wreckage across the first 72 hours. On February 21, 1945, D+2, Marine Corps intelligence officer named Captain Robert Burlingame crawled into a captured pillbox on the island's southwestern edge and discovered something that changed the entire operational assessment. Scattered across a makeshift table, American military manuals, not stolen intelligence documents, not translated tactical summaries, original U.S. Army training publications, M5215 Field Fortifications, FM 6240 Basic Field Artillery, FM 7220 Infantry Battalion, each annotated in precise Japanese characters, pages dog-eared at sections covering reverse slope defense, interlocking fire, and protracted resistance. Beside them lay a battered leather notebook containing hand-drawn diagrams that mirrored American range cards and defensive sector sketches taught at Fort Benning. The handwriting was elegant, measured, methodical. At the bottom of one page, a name in English script, T. Fort Bliss, 1928, Intelligence Summary, 4th Marine Division. February 1945, Burlingame radioed his findings to V Amphibious Corps headquarters. The response was disbelief, then silence, then a flurry of urgent requests for Japanese prisoner interrogation. But Kuribayashi had forbidden surrender. His standing orders: each man will kill 10 Americans before dying. 109th Division Order No. 5, June 1944. In 36 days of combat, only 216 Japanese prisoners would be taken from a garrison of 21,000, a surrender rate of 1%, the lowest of any Pacific battle. The defenders could not explain their commanders' strategy because they had orders to die before talking. So American commanders reverse-engineered the nightmare by walking into it. What they found was an American defense perfected by Japanese discipline and inverted against its creators. Kuribayashi had not simply copied US doctrine, he had studied American psychology, identified American tactical expectations, and designed a defense that weaponized those expectations into fatal assumptions. He knew American forces expected visible fortifications, so he made his invisible. He knew American doctrine prioritized speed and momentum, so he built a battlefield that swallowed momentum like quicksand. He knew American firepower superiority assumed target acquisition, so he created a labyrinth where targets appeared for seconds, fired, and vanished into volcanic stone. Tactical study. Marine Corps Schools, 1946. The engineering achievement alone defied belief. Kuribayashi's chief engineer, Colonel Tadashi Nakani, a mining engineer from Hokkaido Coal Operation construction of a subterranean fortress that exploited Iwo Jima's volcanic geology with precision rivaling the Maginot Line. The island's interior consisted of compressed volcanic ash and sandstone, soft enough to excavate without heavy machinery but stable enough to support multi-level tunnel systems. Nakana's miners carved chambers 30 feet underground where summer temperatures reached 110 degrees Fahrenheit and sulfur fumes choked unventilated spaces. They installed hand-pumped ventilation systems, copied from American mine safety designs Kuribayashi had observed in West Virginia coal country during his 1929 tour. They reinforced tunnel ceilings with coconut logs and salvaged steel materials that absorbed blast concussion without shattering like concrete. Technical Intelligence Bulletin Number 19, July 1945. Each major defensive position featured 5 to 7 escape tunnels radiating in different directions, permitting defenders to fire, retreat through stone corridors immune to artillery, and reappear 200 yards away to fire again. American flamethrower teams would incinerate a bunker, mark it destroyed, advance past it and take fire from the same position 20 minutes later as a fresh crew arrived through underground passages. The Marines called them spider traps. Intelligence officers called them distributed defense nodes. Kuribayashi called them Kyoton strongpoints, a direct translation of the American doctrinal term he'd learned at Fort Benning. U.S. Marine Corps Historical Monograph, 1954. His artillery employment demonstrated mastery of American gunnery theory that stunned U.S. counter-battery officers. Traditional Japanese artillery doctrine emphasized direct fire from coastal positions, guns positioned for naval engagement, easily spotted and destroyed by naval gunfire. Kuribayashi rejected this entirely. He positioned his Type 96 150mm howitzers each, weighing 4 tons, firing 95-pound shells to 18,000 yards in defilade positions on reverse slopes, invisible from offshore observation. He registered them on pre-plotted coordinates, covering every landing beach, every inland approach, every likely staging area. His forward observers occupied concealed positions with direct line of sight, communicating firing solutions through tunnel-based runners who were invulnerable to American signals. Intercept Japanese Monograph, No. 48, 1946. The result: American forces advancing inland walked into pre-registered killing zones where artillery fell with mechanical precision. One Marine Lieutenant, James Vedder of the 25th Regiment, recorded in his after-action report, dramatized composite, We crossed the ridgeline at 14:30 hours and immediately received accurate artillery fire, bracketing our company in under 15 seconds. No adjustment rounds, no ranging shots. They knew exactly where we were before we got there. It was like training at Camp Pendleton, except we were the targets on the range card 25th Marine Regiment War Diary. February 1945. American counter-battery radar, the -584 Seychelles rupees. A technological marvel that could pinpoint enemy guns within seconds by tracking shell trajectories proved nearly useless. Kuribayashi's gunners fired 3 rounds maximum before displacing through tunnels to alternate positions, never remaining stationary long enough for counter-battery fire to find them. U.S. Navy destroyers and battleships expended 14,000 rounds of heavy caliber ammunition in the first 3 days, pulverizing empty positions while hidden guns continued firing. The battleship USS Nevada alone fired 4,216 shells each, weighing 2,700 pounds, an island 8 square miles in area. Kuribayashi simply waited underground until the barrage lifted, then resumed firing. U.S. Pacific Fleet Action Report. March 1945. The climactic demonstration of Kuribayashi's American-trained methodology came on February 23, 1945 D+4 during the assault on Hill 362A, the island's northern highlands. The 21st Marine Regiment, advancing across what reconnaissance had identified as lightly defended ridge, walked into the most sophisticated ambush of the Pacific War. Kuribayashi had converted Hill 362A into a 3D killing ground using American combat doctrine learned during his Fort Bliss observation of the 1st Cavalry Division. The hill's northern face featured 27 mutually supporting pillboxes, each positioned to deliver enfilade fire across 2 or more adjacent positions. His machine gunners, equipped with Type 92 heavy machine guns firing 7.7 mm rounds at 450 rounds per minute, surveyed firing lanes with American-style range cards marked at 50-yard intervals from 300 yards to point-blank technical manual TME 32-480. Japanese artillery. 1945. The Marines attacked at 0800 hours with standard Pacific War tactics. Frontal assault supported by Sherman M4A3 tanks, mounting 75 mm guns. They expected Japanese defenders to reveal positions early, fire wildly, and exhaust ammunition in suicidal resistance. Instead, Kuribayashi's troops held fire until the assault wave reached 75 yards, the optimal range for massed small arms fire taught in every U.S. Army infantry manual. Then they opened fire simultaneously from concealed positions across a 180-degree arc. The 1st Marine Company 187 men suffered 90 casualties in 4 minutes. Survivors scrambled for cover that didn't exist on the barren volcanic slope. Supporting Shermans maneuvered to suppress visible bunkers and immediately struck buried naval mines. Type 93 mines adapted from 500-pound aircraft bombs positioned along every tank approach route. V. Amphibious Corps Engineer Report. March 1945. When American artillery responded with a 30-minute barrage, Kuribayashi's defenders retreated into tunnels and waited. When the barrage lifted and Marines resumed the assault, defenders reappeared in the same positions and resumed firing. This cycle repeated 7 times across February 23 to 24. American casualties climbed to 400, then 800, then 1,200. The hill remained in Japanese hands. A captured diary from a Japanese artillery observer, recovered weeks later, contained a passage that haunts Marine Corps archives. Dramatized composite. The Americans attack with great courage, but predictable method. They assault, we fire. They call artillery, we hide. Artillery stops, we return. They assault again. It is exactly as General Kuribayashi said it would be. They are trapped by their own doctrine. Japanese document No. 2457. Captured enemy documents. 1945. Hill 362A fell on February 26 after 4 days of continuous assault. American casualties, 1,793. Japanese casualties, approximately 1,300. The exchange ratio, 1.4 to 1, represented the most costly ground combat in Marine Corps history. Traditional Pacific Island battles produced exchange ratios of 10 to 1 or higher in American favor. On Iwo Jima, Kuribayashi's American-designed defense reduced that advantage to near-parity casualty statistics. V. Amphibious Corps, March 1945, and across every ravine, every volcanic hellscape still to be crossed, the same American-designed nightmare waited, manned by soldiers who would rather die in tunnels than surrender, commanded by a general who had learned to kill Americans by studying how Americans learned to kill. The island that was supposed to fall in 3 days would take and every additional day existed because one Japanese officer, 2 decades earlier, had paid attention when American instructors taught him how modern defense works. The strategic implications crystallized slowly, painfully, through weeks that stretched American expectations beyond breaking. By March 10, 1945, D+19th battle that was supposed to end in 72 hours had consumed 3 full Marine divisions, generated 17,000 casualties, and was nowhere near conclusion. Major General Harry Schmidt stood in his command post on the northern plateau, staring at maps that resembled topographical nightmares, every ridgeline marked with unit symbols, crossed out, redrawn as replacement companies filled gaps that would be gaps again by sunset. His staff calculated attrition rates that defied Pacific War precedent: 1,200 American casualties per square mile, compared to 300 per square mile at Tarawa, 150 at Kuribayashi's defense was grinding American combat power at a rate 4 times higher than any previous Pacific engagement, and he was doing it with a garrison that possessed no naval support, no air support, no hope of reinforcement, and no possibility of victory via Amphibious Corps statistical study. April 1945, the psychological impact rippled beyond the volcanic island. Every Marine division in the Pacific received after-action reports from Iwo Jima with the same haunting conclusion: the enemy had adapted, not tactically. Kuribayashi had identified the fundamental assumption underlying American Pacific strategy, that superior firepower, naval supremacy, and industrial capacity would inevitably overwhelm inferior Japanese forces through swift, violent amphibious assault. That assumption worked at Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Kwajalein, Saipan. It was encoded in War Plan Orange, refined through decades of Naval War College studies, and validated by 2 years of island-hopping success. Then, one Japanese general with American training manuals demonstrated that firepower superiority became irrelevant when the enemy refused to present targetable positions, that naval supremacy meant nothing against subterranean fortresses, and that industrial capacity couldn't accelerate victory when every yard of volcanic rock required satchel charges and close-quarters brutality that killed attackers and defenders in equal measure. Strategic assessment, Joint Chiefs of Staff, May 1945, intelligence interrogations of the 216 Japanese prisoners captured alive, most wounded unconscious, unable to commit suicide, revealed the psychological architecture Kuribayashi had constructed within his garrison. Unlike previous battles where Japanese morale collapsed after initial American bombardment, Iwo Jima's defenders maintained cohesion until physical annihilation. Kuribayashi had forbidden bonsai charges, not merely as tactical waste, but as psychological discipline. He understood that suicidal attacks provided emotional releaser, cathartic charge into enemy fire. The samurai death, the honorable end, by denying his men that release, by ordering them to die slowly in dark tunnels, killing methodically rather than gloriously. He transformed them into instruments of attrition rather than honor. It was psychologically unbearable for men raised in bushido tradition, but it was militarily effective in ways Tokyo's general staff had never imagined. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey. Interrogation Report, No. 435, 1946, closing parenthesis. One prisoner, a lieutenant named Toshio Yamamoto, captured March 15, with severe burns after his tunnel complex was sealed by described Kuribayashi's final address to his officers. In June 1944, dramatized composite. The general told us we would not die as samurai, we would die as soldiers. He said the Americans teach their soldiers that victory matters more than honor, that killing the enemy matters more than dying bravely. He said if we wanted to honor the emperor, we would forget honor and kill Americans until we could kill no more. Many officers wept, some requested transfer. The general denied all requests. He said we would learn to fight like Americans because Americans understood modern war better than we did. Attis Interrogation Report Number 1347, March 1945. That psychological inversion, the deliberate suppression of cultural identity in service of military effectiveness, represented Kuribayashi's most profound strategic innovation. He had recognized that Japanese tactical culture, for all its courage and discipline, was fundamentally incompatible with modern industrial warfare. So he didn't reform it, he replaced it, imposing American doctrine through hierarchical command authority his men could not refuse. The result was a hybrid force that combined American tactical methodology with Japanese acceptance of death and nightmare combination that American planners had never anticipated, and had no doctrine to counter. Marine Corps Gazette analysis, July 1946. The human cost of Kuribayashi's strategy exceeded even his calculations. American casualties reached 26,038 by the battle's official end on March 26, 1945, 6,821 dead, 19,217 wounded. 27 Medals of Honor were awarded, more than any battle in American history, reflecting not individual heroism but systemic desperation. The recognition that ordinary tactics failed, that every position required extraordinary sacrifice. Navy corpsmen, medics, who treated casualties under fire suffered 738 casualties themselves, a 40% casualty rate among medical personnel that indicated how thoroughly Kuribayashi's defense collapsed safe rear areas. There were no rear areas on Iwo Jima. Every square meter of volcanic ash was registered by Japanese artillery, plotted for machine gun fire, or concealed a spider trap waiting to kill medics, treating wounded Marines. Navy Medical Corps. After Action Report, April 1945. Japanese casualties approached totality, 18,844. Confirmed dead out of 21,000 90% death rate that represented the highest sustained combat loss in modern military history. Kuribayashi himself died in the final days, exact date unknown, likely leading a final attack after his command structure collapsed. His body was never identified. No surrender document was signed. The battle simply ended when organized resistance became physically impossible, when the last tunnel networks were sealed, the last hidden gunners burned out, the last soldiers expired from wounds, dehydration, or sulfur fume asphyxiation in caves they could no longer exit. American engineers spent weeks afterward dynamiting cave entrances and pumping poison gas into tunnel systems where Japanese holdouts might remain. The island's secure status remained theoretical for months, combat engineers report. V. Amphibious Corps, June 1945. Yet the strategic value, the reason 26,000 Americans were killed or wounded for 8 square miles of volcanic rock materialized exactly as Air Force planners predicted. Iwo Jima's 3 airfields, captured and expanded under ongoing Japanese artillery fire, began receiving damaged B-29 superfortresses returning from Tokyo raids in March 1945. By August, 2,400 B-29 emergency landings had been recorded, saving an estimated 27,000 American aircrew lives, more than the total American casualties in capturing the island. P-51 Mustang fighters based on Iwo Jima escorted bombing raids over Japan, reducing B-29 losses from 6% per mission to under 2%. The island became what planners envisioned, an unsinkable aircraft carrier, 660 miles from Tokyo, worth every life spent taking it. Army Air Force's Statistical Digest, 1946. But Kuribayashi's legacy extended far beyond one volcanic island's tactical significance. His defense became required study at every American military academy, dissected for lessons about enemy adaptation, doctrinal flexibility, and the dangers of tactical predictability. The Marine Corps rewrote amphibious assault doctrine after Iwo Jima, incorporating counter-tunnel warfare techniques, extended preliminary bombardment, and psychological operations targeting enemy morale before landings. The Army's infantry school added case studies on defense in depth and reversed slope defense, now taught using American manuals that a Japanese general had used to kill Americans. Fort Benning instructors faced the uncomfortable reality that their own training materials, when adopted by a disciplined enemy with nothing to lose, became devastatingly effective against American forces. U.S. Army Infantry School, Circular, 1947. The Cold War amplified Kuribayashi's strategic insights. American planners studying Soviet defensive doctrine in Central Europe recognized similar principles: defensive, interlocking fires, protracted resistance, willingness to sustain catastrophic casualties to impose operational delay. NATO defensive planning for the Fulda Gap incorporated lessons from Iwo Jima: hardened positions, concealed artillery, redundant communication through landlines, immune to electronic warfare. The Vietnamese communists studied Iwo Jima's tunnel warfare extensively, adapting Kuribayashi's subterranean tactics for Siu Chi and the Ho Chi Minh Trail. During the 1991 Gulf War, American intelligence assessed Iraqi fortifications in Kuwait and found bunker designs eerily similar to Iwo Jima's: spider traps, concealed positions with multiple exits, registered artillery, interlocking fires. The difference: precision-guided munitions and thermal imaging, negated advantages that volcanic rock had provided 50 years earlier. Defense intelligence analysis. Operation Desert Storm, 1991. Modern counterinsurgency doctrine acknowledges Kuribayashi's central insight that technological superiority becomes irrelevant when the enemy refuses conventional engagement and transforms terrain into a three-dimensional battlefield, where every position must be fought for individually. Afghanistan's cave complexes, Iraq's urban warfare, Gaza's tunnel networks, all echo Iwo Jima's fundamental lesson that defenders who accept death and control terrain can impose catastrophic costs on attackers, regardless of firepower disparity. The American military still has no perfect answer to this problem. Firepower remains overwhelming, technology remains superior, but when the enemy is willing to die slowly, invisibly, methodically, when honor is sacrificed for effectiveness, victory becomes measured in body counts rather than operational. Maneuver Counterinsurgency Field Manual, FM3 224, 2006, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi's final letter to his wife, written February 13, 1945, and discovered in his abandoned command bunker months later, contained a passage that survived him. I may not return. Tell our children that their father fought not for glory, but for time. Every day we hold this island is another day Japan survives. That is the only victory available to us now. Kuribayashi Family Letters, published 1995. He held the island for 36 days. Japan survived another 163 days after Iwo Jima fell, surrendering August 15, 1945, after atomic weapons demonstrated that industrial warfare had evolved beyond even Kuribayashi's calculations. The universal lesson from that sulphurous killing ground remains uncomfortably relevant. In modern war, doctrine matters less than adaptation, firepower matters less than terrain, and victory matters less than the price you force your enemy to pay for it. Kuribayashi learned American methods, perfected them with discipline Americans could not sustain, and transformed them into a nightmare his teachers could barely survive. He won no victory, but he taught the world's most powerful military that knowing your enemy's doctrine means nothing when your enemy knows yours better and is willing to die proving it.